Colonel, you touched on something important there, which is, of course, China. And you mentioned that briefly that, China has essentially told Washington, we're not going to listen to your demands, these sanctions, for example, if you don't want us importing Iranian oil, we're not going to listen to that. We're going to do what we need to do. Speak to the importance of that. I mean, this is really, I think, a very big move from China, essentially standing up on the world stage. Does that just really show that China has a lot more power and that they just are not going to take these threats from Donald Trump?
Well, it should demonstrate that to President Trump and to Washington. I'm not sure that it will. I hope it does, because China is rapidly becoming the dominant power. And how did China become the dominant power? By intervening in other people's countries, by blockading other people's ports, by destroying supply chains in other people's regions? No. It's become the dominant power by focusing exclusively on commerce and building its own prosperity. We don't seem to understand that's what we did until we involved ourselves in World War I and World War II. We did exactly the same thing. We avoided unnecessary conflict, and we built up our own strength, our own infrastructure. Today, people go to China and they say, it's brilliant, Doug. Can't imagine what it's like. I said, no, I know. That's what people said about us at one point. But we've thrown all that away. And there doesn't seem to be any end to it right now. It's almost as though we've decided to become entirely dependent upon bullying people in order to reach agreements with them. That's catastrophic. So I think Beijing right now has seen us embark on a series of suicidal policies. And the most serious suicidal policy yet is this war on behalf of Israel, not just against Iran, but effectively against anybody Israel doesn't like, because Israel spends most of its time killing its neighbors, immediate neighbors. So we've actually relieved them of the burden of dealing directly with Iran so they can, deal with others that they dislike, that they want to mass murder or expel. People in Gaza, people in the West Bank, people in southern Lebanon. And that's by no means the end. They wear the Greater Israel patch, and that tells you they want everything that's in Jordan, the Sinai plus all the way to the Nile. So what we're also not seeing are the Turks and the Egyptians, who are on the margins of this. Their populations want to destroy Israel. The leaders are much more circumspect and have exercised great restraint. How much longer will that continue? And who really thinks that once this business ends in the Gulf, and it will, with Iran, whether it ends with a bang or with a whimper is anybody's question, but it's going to end. Who thinks that Israel will remain Israel when this is over? That everyone will say, well, that's wonderful. Now we can go back to normal. No. This is the real message that Iran is sending to everybody. Normal is over. The status quo is over. The Arabs are saying this, there's no more Sykes-Picot. That's dead. And Sykes-Picot was instrumental in creating Israel. So I just, it's incomprehensible to me that no one can look beyond the end of their noses in Washington. Everyone right now is trying to figure out, are we hitting the right targets? They haven't figured out, it doesn't matter how many targets you hit.
Right.
These people aren't going to give up. No. And why should they? It's their country. Just like, the Iranians published a set of regulations. I don't know if you saw it, outlining the future of the Strait of Hormuz. Did you see that?
I haven't. Not yet.
No, where they talk about the new authority for the strait, which they see as initially themselves, but then they say this is going to become international. Others in the region are going to have to be involved with this, other great powers. Very intelligent. Absolutely right. We need a new authority to shape how this is handled. You had such a thing emerge after World War I in 1926 called the Montreux Convention. And that essentially said, Turks, you lost the war, but you control the strait. And these are the way we want you to behave. And these are the things you say you want. Will you accept it? They said, yes. We've never had any problems with the Turks over the Bosporus. And I think this is exactly what the Iranians are looking for right now. But what are we going to do? We're going to say absolutely not. Because from our standpoint, if you're President Trump, that's surrender.
Right.
So how do you get beyond this sort of mental block that says everything must be decided by our force, our interest, our demands, even when we have no interest in the Strait of Hormuz other than to have free access to it like everybody else, which we had before the war.
Right. Colonel, I have a good, interesting question. We saw Secretary of State Marco Rubio yesterday. He essentially addressed the nation and said, our goal now with this war is to get to the point where the Strait of Hormuz is open, much like it was at the beginning of the war. I mean, is that just a remarkable statement? I mean, is that just the United States admitting, a complete failure of this war? Because essentially, we want to go back to the conditions of February 27th. That's that, when the Strait of Hormuz was open. But I guess now, as you said, Iran has now put out a plan saying, look, there's going to be a future authority and how we're going to deal with this. So let me know your thoughts on Marco Rubio's comment.
Right now in the world, everyone other than the United States, Israel, and perhaps the UAE, which has turned out to be a duplicitous but steadfast supporter of Israel, everyone in the world sees Iran as an heroic figure on the world stage because Iran has stood up against the United States and Israel. So that's the first thing that has to be understood. So from the vantage point of the rest of the world, hearing Rubio say this it elicits laughter for the reason you just cited. Well, that's what we had before you made war on Iran. But here in the United States, there may not be an understanding of that, sadly. You'll have lots of people who say, well, that's right. But what Rubio really meant was, we want it to be open, but we want it to be open on our terms. Iran's terms are unacceptable. Although it's a fact that Iran controls most of the coastline in the Persian Gulf. They have the greatest stake in what happens in the Gulf. They live there. We don't live there. We don't have much of a stake in it. So we're back to where we were before. Who are you kidding, Secretary Rubio?
Right.
Now, he knows he's kidding the American people. And thus far, he has gotten away with it. So has President Trump. I run into people all the time and I say, what do you think? Oh, we ought to just crush those people. Really? Really? Why? Oh, well, we've had problems with them for years. We just need to finish this and crush them. I President, right? So, well, what happens if Russia and China decide that crushing is unacceptable? Because if it ever came to that, I think Russia and China would intervene directly. And there's nothing to stop them from doing that. What is going to get in the way of Russia and China? Oh, well, we'll send out our Navy and Air Force. Okay, well, look what it's taken to deal with Iran. Most of the U.S. Navy, in one way or another, has had to divert its attention, its resources, its people into the Persian Gulf region, into the Arabian Sea, the Indian Ocean. If that's what it's taking to deal with Iran, that spends 1% or a fraction of a percentage on defense that we do, then that suggests if we have to take on Russia and China, we're toast. People aren't smart. They don't think in those terms. We're the greatest power in the world. I mean, this sounds like Great Britain before the First World War, where the British used to sing in the pubs. We've got the men, we've got the ships, we've got the money too. So we could go and do anything we want. And much of what we call British power and the British Empire died on the battlefields of World War I for nothing, against people that were never their enemies. And that's what we're doing right now. The people who live in Iran or Persia are not, by definition, enemies of the United States.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Colonel, I want to talk a little bit about the blockade because I've seen some interesting analysis. There's a IMF economist named Robin Brooks. He's been very vocal on Twitter, basically saying the United States blockade has been a tremendous success. He's actually advocating that this is what we should have done to Russia, with the Russian-Ukraine war. And in his theory, he says that if the United States continues the blockade, we're basically going to destroy the Iranian economy. They're going to come on their hands and knees begging for a deal. And all we need to do is continue this blockade. Why is that failing? Why is that theory?
What did you say this man's name was?
Robin Brooks.
Robin Brooks. I don't know this person.
Okay.
Probably needs to look at a few maps and understand something. When we blockaded Cuba, we called it a quarantine, but it was effectively a blockade. We committed on a routine basis 180 ships. Cuba was an island. Blockading Cuba was possible. There are people that looked at World War II and discovered after the war, in fact, it was Admiral Nimitz that implied this, we didn't understand the lethality and capability of submarines. If we had had 200 submarines at the beginning of the war, we could have blockaded Japan and starved it into submission. Yes, Japan's a collection of islands. Yes, that's eminently possible. Iran is not an island. That's the first thing Robin Brooks needs to understand. Secondly, Iran borders other nations. These nations are, on the whole, friendly to and absolutely not hostile to Iran. Mm-hmm. He doesn't understand the Belt and Road Project, which has now put rail lines that reach all the way down to Bandar Abbas from Russia and Central Asia that carry all sorts of goods and can actually carry fuel. Then you have other routes that run through Pakistan, straight through Pakistan, all the way to China. And then you have seaports. There's a seaport built by the Chinese on the coast of Pakistan called Gujarat. And that particular seaport is only 54 miles from the Iranian border. So you can land all sorts of materiel, including food and other kinds of critical resources there that can be trucked from there through Pakistan right into Iran. Now, I suppose you could then commit most of the U.S. Air Force to fly all over the region 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to try and pick off any of these places, destroy these routes. We've got most of the Navy committed, so I guess we can commit most of the Air Force. I don't think it'll work. You know, you also have routes right across the Caspian into Russia from Iran. And finally, we're back to Turkey. This is the giant 400 or 500 pound gorilla in the room that nobody talks about, the real once and future military power of the region. How much longer will they sit this thing out before they finally said enough is enough? This just doesn't make any sense. And even that blockade of Cuba, which included 180 surface ships, that didn't include, that also included some submarines, included lots and lots of aircraft. There were 8 aircraft carriers involved in that. 4 were what we would regard as standard aircraft carriers, and 4 were submarine chasers. We were right next to the continental United States. The Caribbean was effectively a puddle that we controlled. We don't control all that ocean space. We don't control the Red Sea. We don't currently control the Persian Gulf. We don't control the Caspian. I'm not sure we could lay claim to controlling the Eastern Mediterranean. And we don't have the ships to do it. And everybody fails to realize, you send a ship over to another ship and you stop it and you inspect it, you board it. Then you have to take custody of this thing, depending upon what you decide. There are all sorts of problems with this. It's not even an intelligent legal option for us right now. It's not resource sensitive. We're overreaching again. We've been overreaching too much, and this is another overreach. So no, I think that's absolutely crazy.
Yeah,
to put it bluntly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think thanks for bringing in the expert analysis there. I agree with you. It's potential opportunity if it's an island, but with the land borders, and we also forget just the size of Iran, right? 4 times the size of Iraq. It's a large country. Tremendous relations with its neighbors, Belt and Road Initiative, railways. I mean, lots of options there for Iran. Colonel, I've got an interesting question. Today at the time of this recording is May 6th. Is Iran in a stronger position today than they were on February 27th? Is this war basically just enabled Iran and really have them emerge as a new world power in this new geopolitical world?
I think you can make that case. I think from the standpoint of the rest of the world, Iran has now stepped on the stage again as a great power, something it has not done for a couple of hundred years, frankly. And it's going to remain in that position for some time to come, because what they've done is achieved a victory not by attacking us, but by defending themselves against us and demonstrating that they cannot be conquered. And that's a very important statement. That's something that Abraham Lincoln tried to tell Americans. By the way, before he did, Andrew Jackson did. And Andrew Jackson says, the only problem we have in this country are other Americans. If we decide to kill each other, we can destroy this place, but nobody can take us on. We're too big. No one can land on our shores with great ease and march all over the country. They'll exhaust themselves. They don't have enough forces. Andrew Jackson was right. Right now, the same thing is largely true for Iran. And when I hear people talk about, well, we need to invade Iran, they have no idea what they're talking about. If you look at what it took to mount the Normandy invasion, the forces that were required, and what did we do? We went from the northern coast of France and the southern coast of France, inevitably, all the way to the Czech border. Well, if you did that in Iran, you wouldn't even get halfway up the length of the Iranian state. You'd be somewheres in the middle, probably of a desert. Or if you were going to try to get into the country and you tried to go in from the north or from the west, then you're going through something that looks like the Rocky Mountains. It's like, well, we'll go ahead and we'll march to Leadville, Colorado from Colorado Springs. That's pretty rough. That's a long haul. You're going thousands of feet up and, long distance to sustain yourself, and you can be cut off at any number of different places. The whole thing is just not doable. This business of we cannot be conquered is important. The Russians made that point to Napoleon, and they were right. They made it subsequently in their history to the Germans, and I think the Iranians can say the same thing. We cannot be conquered. Now that leads you to nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. Well, the use of a nuclear weapon is off the table, and thank goodness President Trump made that abundantly clear in a press conference quite recently, and I'm glad he did.
Agreed. Well, now that the nuclear weapon is off the table, as President Trump did point out, and I agree that I'm very thankful that he said that. What is a viable exit from this catastrophe for the United States? Would it just be to admit that, we've made a mistake, try to go back to what it was, but now realize that there's a new authority, Iran has that global power? Do you see that happening? You did mention earlier that probably most likely we're going to look at a ground invasion at some point. What is the easiest pathway for an exit here, that Donald Trump certainly needs?
Well, I've said this several times, and, I don't know that President Trump is receptive to this sort of thing. He strikes me as having become, over the last 4 or 5 years, much more rigid in his thinking and in his mindset than the man I remember. He was not that rigid when I last spoke to him in 2020 by any means. Much more open-minded. And I would describe him at that point as singularly disinterested in dragging the United States into another war. Right. All of that's changed now. But if I were talking to him, I said, what you've got to do is very straightforward, very simple. You go to the podium in Washington, D.C., and you make an announcement. You say, I wanted to talk to the American people. In fact, what I would do, I do it from the Oval Office, and I would talk to the American people. I wouldn't screw around with this Washington press corps, which I know he hates anyway. Right. So just go into the Oval Office and make it an announcement at 8 or 9 o'clock at night so everybody can watch it. And just say, I've reviewed everything that we've undertaken against Iran to this point. It's abundantly clear that we've done enormous damage, and this damage will not be reversed quickly. But it's also clear that what we've done is not going to achieve our ultimate aims. So I've decided to suspend all further military operations on the following grounds. Number one, we're not going to achieve what we want with our military power. That's clear. Number two, what we've done is harm the global economy, and that was not something that I wanted, and I still don't want it. And I want the world to have access to everything that's in the Persian Gulf: fertilizer, food, feedstock, fuel, everything. We've got to end this immediately because our friends have been hurt. India, Japan, Taiwan, even China, Korea, we're Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand. We don't want to hurt those people. We don't want to hurt our European friends and allies. So I'm going to halt this immediately. I am directing CENTCOM to disengage our forces. We are leaving. And we urge the Iranians to open the strait so that everyone can have access. Finally, I'm going to talk with some of our close friends and ask them for assistance in finding a way forward with Iran that does not include direct military conflict. In other words, we need to resolve our disputes in other ways. Thank you for listening to me. Keep in mind, I regret whatever damage that's being done to this point, but the best way to redress that is to end it. And that's what I'm doing. Thank you. God bless America. Out. Yeah. I think that would work because most Americans would receive that positively. Now, it won't go down with, combat heroes like Lindsey Graham, right, and others. There goes, this is a full-scale surrender. No, it's not. It's dealing in a forthright manner with the facts.
Right.
But, that's something he's not inclined to do.
Yeah. Well, we can only hope that President Trump can certainly come to that conclusion at some point. But, Colonel, I just want to say thank you so much for your incredible insights. We just saw this past week for the first time, mainstream media has finally reported that the U.S. military bases were attacked in the very early stages. But of course, you were on our podcast, very quickly, and you were one of the first ones that admitted that. And that's why we have you on the show, because you provide the insights that the mainstream media is not doing. And I just want to say thank you for your amazing work. And then our final thing is just let everybody know, where we can continue to follow your work. I've been following your new Substack. It's amazing. Love your articles. So just tell us where we can continue to follow your amazing insights and work.
Well, thanks for that. Yes, the Macgregor Warrior Substack is well worth people's time to read. I'm trying to write new things and post them every week, especially while the war goes on. And I'm trying to provide a different perspective, although there are other good people out there making similar arguments, but nevertheless. So that's one place. I would also urge people to go to my website where virtually everything I've ever said or done is posted. And then, the national conversation, we have been waiting for this war to resolve itself in some fashion before we swing into full action. But the national conversation is really about finding a new way forward. We want to explore what the options are because we really want a third party, to be blunt. We think the two parties have failed us. And a lot of Americans that we talk to tell us that. We want to offer an alternative. Whether or not we can, I don't know. But I think based on a lot of events over the last few years, more and more people are beginning to understand this. And I'm one of these people that believes. I grew up with nothing but Democrats in Philadelphia, and they were solid people, believed just as much in the country as anybody that I knew who was a Republican. We can bring these people together and forge a different path into the future, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you as well. So everybody, we're going to put the links down to Colonel Macgregor's website, his Substack, and also a good follow on Twitter as well. I'd encourage everybody to follow all three of those sources. Colonel, thank you again for your amazing insights, your time today. And we look forward to welcoming you back to the show in the future as we always continue to talk about this crazy world that we live in.
Thank you, Cyrus.
I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you in our next interview soon.
Your old t-shirt still in the chair. I tell myself I don't care. Then I fold it up and put it back like I ain't scared of what I lack. Ain't no thunder, ain't no war, just one less heartbeat through the door. Here's the empty side of the bed. The gives me more than the words we said.